Okay, folks, it looks like we're starting to kind of tail off here on folks coming in. We've got a very large crowd today. It is my pleasure to be with you all today, serving as your moderator. I am Eric Schurter with Corteva Agriscience. I serve as our U.S. Crop Protection Technical Lead. I'm also joined by our two guest speakers today. Jeff, would you kind of introduce yourself and let the audience know where you're kind of working at in the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Jeff Bodie. I am a market development specialist here in Northern Illinois.
Dennis.
Yeah, my name is Dennis Holland. I am also market development specialist, and I cover the Southern Iowa area.
Great, great. Today, folks, if you're here for the general applicator training, you're in the right spot. It's an opportunity for us as an organization to kind of make sure we're sharpening the sword as we get into those spray season coming up here. Hard to believe, just a few months away. A few things that I want to kind of go over before we start. Always we got to have the legalese. Our lawyers appreciate that. But just kind of wanted to give what we're going to be going over today. We'll do a quick high level 2025 season recap. We'll talk a little bit about the trait system. We'll stop at the bottom of the hour approximately, and we'll do a Q&A session there. And then we'll continue on with our weed control program approaches, label considerations, and some updates, and do a second Q&A near the top of the hour. We will stay on as long as there's questions coming in. If you do have to leave at the top of the hour, we fully understand and do appreciate your attendance. If you do have questions, please address those in the Q&A, and we will try to do our best to either answer those live today, or if it's a quick answer, we'll just respond back. To kind of give a real season recap of where we've been at with the Enlist Weed Control System. First and foremost, we appreciate all your business that you all have given us over the past many years, as we've now, the Enlist Weed Control System, and specifically Enlist E3 soybeans, are on over 65% of the U.S. soybean market in 2025. Now, with that, a lot of growers are reaching for that elite germplasm, and at the same time, they're wanting to utilize Enlist One or Enlist Duo. And obviously, as we talk today, you'll see the features and benefits of those two herbicides. Now, the one thing we're very proud of here at Corteva Agriscience is really what we have in our proven track record. One in where we've been able to clearly demonstrate neighbor-friendly weed control. We launched the product responsibly, tested it with not only internal, but also external universities to really deliver the results and everything you need as a customer to deliver excellent weed control. As we look at just some of the highlights here, since we started utilizing Enlist herbicides back in 2017, we've sprayed more than 150 million acres here in the United States alone. This is our 8th consecutive year of market share gains, not only in Enlist soybeans, but also Enlist corn and Enlist cotton. The one thing about the soybean business is we've had greater than 65% market penetration with the E3 soybeans. And when growers are reaching for that high yielding germplasm, they will also want to utilize that technology. They really need the weed control. That's why we see approximately about a 75% spray rate with Enlist herbicides over top of E3 soybeans. Now, at the same time, we've had clear differences throughout the countryside over the years with dicamba, and due to those formulations, we just heard here recently, obviously, dicamba over the top. It will be available in the upcoming year. Will be determined if 2026 will be here in time, but obviously for that 27 season. But even with all the label restrictions and things that have come about, we still see a clear difference in what we're bringing to the marketplace and what we've delivered. With that said, let's kind of dive off into this, and I'll turn it over to Jeff Bodie as he kind of really talks about the Enlist Weed Control System, the traits, and some various aspects. Jeff?
All right, Eric, thank you for the handoff there. So, as we think about the Enlist Weed Control System, it really is a systems approach, right? So, there's three main pieces, three main pillars to this that really drive our overall message. The first is the traits. So, identifying the Enlist and Enlist corn as well as Enlist cotton. And then, of course, the Enlist E3 soybeans, which I deal a lot here with Illinois. The second piece, that second pillar, is our herbicides. So looking at the Enlist One and Enlist Duo, and we'll get into more details what those herbicides are here shortly. The last piece, yet the first piece is Enlist Ahead, our stewardship piece. So as you see on that timeline below, about 14 years ago, we actually started with the Enlist Ahead message, talking about stewardship. We knew that for the success of this trait in this system, we had to start with education, and really excited for what this has enabled us to do. The first crop we really want to dive into is Enlist E3 soybeans. So as Dr. Schroeder mentioned, we got a greater than 65% market penetration here in the U.S. So what does that Enlist E3 soybean bring to us? So first, let's talk about herbicide tolerances. With that E3 soybean, we have tolerances to 2,4-D choline, which is in our Enlist 1 and Enlist 2 herbicides, as well as glyphosate and glufosinate. Now, a big piece of what has allowed us to get to this 65% market share is the 120 different seed organizations that have a license to the E3 trait. Pretty excited for this, to be able to utilize these traits with local seed agencies, local seed dealers. And the last piece there is the education piece, the training for those growers and applicators and seed sellers around this trait spectrum. The second crop that we're going to touch base, to jump in here really quick, talking about the E3 soybeans, the crop response side of it. So bringing a new trait to the marketplace, we want to identify that the trait is 100% safe for this crop. So looking at the two pictures that we show here, the picture on the left is a 1x use rate of our Enlist Duo herbicide. Enlist Duo herbicide is a premix of our 2,4-D choline as well as glyphosate. The picture on the right there shows a 2x rate, trying to simulate an overspray or double up type of area. As you can see here, very little crop response, and those soybeans are growing very, very well. Now we think about the 2,4-D choline. The plant needs to metabolize this trait. So as we think about soybean response right after application, we may see a soybean plant be a little bit droopy as it metabolizes the 2,4-D choline. But within 24 to 48 hours, we'll see that crop stand back up, and obviously there's no negative yield impact with these herbicides. The second crop I want to dive into is Enlist corn. So the Enlist corn trait actually came out after cotton and before soybeans. But we're really seeing a ramp up in recent years just due to the trait expansion that we're seeing out of Corteva genetics. So looking at traits, you'll see PowerCore Enlist, PowerCore Enlist Ultra, and Vorseed Enlist becoming more prevalent in the marketplace. These hybrids and traits offer 4 different herbicide tolerances. Same as soybeans, we have the 2,4-D choline, the glyphosate, and the glufosinate. But in addition, we have FOB tolerance controls, which allows us to spray products like Assure 2 to control grasses as well as volunteer corn without that Enlist trait. Now, similar to soybeans, we know that the 2,4-D choline has to metabolize in that corn plant. It'll be rare, but you may occasionally see that corn plant lean a little bit as it metabolizes that herbicide. And again, this corn plant will stand right back up in 24 to 48 hours. There again is no impact on yield. And this is something we just want to you all be aware of in case you would see this after application. The third crop touching base on is Enlist cotton. Again, this herbicide tolerances are the same as our soybeans with 2,4-D choline, glyphosate, and glufosinate. Really excited for these in this area where oftentimes in the cotton world, we're spraying all 3 of these herbicides to maintain that tough weed control. When looking at crop response here, we're actually identifying different systems. So the system on the left is our Enlist Duo herbicide application on Enlist cotton. The system on the right is the Extend program, where we're looking at Extended Max plus Roundup Power Max on the Extend cotton acre. And here we can see that the crops are very similar, growing very well. Not much difference between the 2 systems there when it comes to crop response. All right, so we have identified the different crops that we have in the traits. Now let's dive into the two different herbicides. So I've mentioned Enlist Duo here a little bit. Again, it's that premix of 2,4-D choline and glyphosate. But the vast majority of us are used to dealing with Enlist One. Enlist One's our straight goods 2,4-D choline product. And the main reason that we're utilizing the Enlist One product on the vast majority of acres is because of tank mix adaptability. Here in Illinois, we're going to always have the message of on our E3 soybeans that we're going to mix Enlist One plus glufosinate to provide two modes of actions for those tough to control weeds like water hemp. As well as that glufosinate tank mix, we also need to add residuals as well as different insecticides and fungicides at time. And the Enlist One product has a vast product availability to be able to have these tank mix partners. Great flexibility. When looking at 2,4-D choline, 2,4-D has been a common herbicide that we've all been used to for years. We know there's 2,4-D amine out there. We know there's 2,4-D ester. With these herbicides, one thing that's very common though is they're highly volatile. And we knew that we had to bring a herbicide to market today that was far less volatile to be able to utilize it in crop production. So looking at the chart on the right, when comparing 2,4-D choline to 2,4-D ester, we see a 96% reduction in volatility. And when comparing the 2,4-D choline to the 2,4-D amine, we see 88% reduction, which is exactly where we want to be. Now, also, when we're talking about systems, right, we should compare the Enlist system to other systems out in the market. So looking at this comparison, we're looking at a straight goods dicamba plus glyphosate application. We can see that the Enlist Duo herbicide tank mix with the CoolXD technology was 98% less volatile than that comparison. Now, often the first question I get asked is, can any 2,4-D herbicide be used on Enlist crops? So we know that Enlist One and Enlist Duo herbicides with the CoolXD technology are the only 2,4-D herbicides labeled for pre and post emergence with the Enlist crops. The main reason for this is a smart choice as we know these products offer very low volatility and greatly reduced drift potential for these crops. And lastly, the use of any other 2,4-D containing products with these Enlist crops is actually a violation of the TUA, which we'll get into here shortly. So the third pillar of the Enlist program is this Enlist Ahead, the stewardship program. And within the Enlist Ahead, there's really three different buckets, I would call it, that make this up. So first, we have the management resources. We have application guides, product use guides, as well as technology with the Enlist Ahead app to be able to have all this information at the touch of our fingertips. The second side is education and training, the online training that we're doing today, as well as multiple field training throughout the summers, as well as a great resource library to be able to have all this information in one spot. And the last piece is the technology advancements. I've mentioned the 2,4-D choline and that CoolXD technology that exists today, but we're constantly valuing additional tank mix partners that can be utilized with the Enlist system to make sure that we're maintaining that volatility and drift reduction. So we know that Enlist herbicides with the CoolXD technology are the only 2,4-D containing products authorized and specifically labeled for the Enlist crops. So again, the main purpose of these that we want to continue to do is, number one, reduce physical drift. We know these products have 90% less drift than those traditional 2,4-D formulations. The other aspect is the near zero volatility, the ability for these products to be sprayed safely next to other crops. We know that the 2,4-D choline is 96% less volatile than the esters, 88% less volatile than the 2,4-D amines. And lastly, the endangered species assessment. We know that the Enlist herbicides were the first to be evaluated and registered with the EPA's new standard, and pretty proud of that. So I mentioned earlier the technology use agreement. And this agreement is an agreement between Corteva and the grower which allows the grower access to seed technology. Within this technical use agreement, there's also outlines for acceptable herbicide applications with these Enlist crops. The second piece that we do to continue to promote compliant herbicide use is working with retailers and growers on Enlist stewardship for trait herbicide longevity, right? We want to make sure these traits are viable today as well as in the future. And the third piece there, just looking at the different training materials, I didn't mention before, but we have a product use guide that's widely available that has all this information, as well as that online Enlist Ahead app. So looking at, again, what happens when we see unauthorized use. So first of all, we know that not following a pesticide label is illegal and can result in fines. When we think about the complications of unauthorized use, and I should start out, we're super proud that we're 99% of the applications that made there are within the label. Super excited for that. But in the event there is an unauthorized use, we know that off-target movement is all of a sudden a risk. In an off-target movement situation, we know that the grower is probably responsible and potentially will be unlikely covered by the insurance. The second side of it is that in that unauthorized use, they can go on a list resulting in the loss of that TUA or the Enlist seed. Third piece that is a threat to the technology. We want to maintain this for future. And the last thing we need is any type of restrictions to be imposed. And the fourth one, behind the scenes, is reinvestment. Corteva is constantly reinvesting dollars to be able to, again, talk about tank mix partners, but also develop traits for the future. When we think about options, what tools do we have? So number one, we have a hotline that's available for any type of unauthorized herbicide or seed use, and which is anonymous, right? Calling in there. If you see something, there's a hotline number there that we can call to report that. We want to constantly promote the terms of that TUA, that technology use agreement for proper use. And we know with that TUA, we got the right to be able to investigate allegations of misuse, if that was the case. And lastly, looking at cases of misuse for the inappropriate or promotion, we just want to make sure that if there is a misuse, we know we have to potentially report this to state and federal agencies. So we talked really about the three pillars of the system, but now let's bring it to real application stuff here. So looking at soybeans first, we always want to start clean, right? We want to start whether it's a burn down or tillage. That's the foundation of every type of good weed control system out there. Along with that, then we're going to plant our Enlist E3-traited soybeans, one of those 120 different seed agencies that have that license for E3. Great start, but now we know the foundation of herbicide is a focal point. Preventing weeds from coming up is our strongest asset to be able to have viable weed management. Looking at products like a Kyber Pro or Sonic Boom up front at either pre-plant or pre-emerge type of applications. So now that we've got that done, the crop is growing well. We know we're going to have to make an in-season application. So we're starting first with either that Enlist Duo, that tank mix of our 2,4-D choline and glyphosate, or our Enlist One. Here in Illinois, again, we're going to talk a lot about Enlist One plus glufosinate to be able to target those tough weeds like water hemp. And along with that tank mix, we're going to focus on a residual product such as Inversa to be able to, again, kill what weeds are there, but prevent additional weeds from emerging. Corn approach is similar to where we're looking at starting clean with tillage. Again, that focal point. On the Enlist corn side, though, there's a wider trait expansion there. So if we're looking for below and above ground traits, we can focus on that borer seed, or look at above ground traits solely with those Power Core Enlist or Power Core Ultra. After planting there, or at the time of planting, whether we're looking at pre-emergent or pre-applications, utilizing a great soil residual is key. And then we know we're going to follow up again with an in-crop type of application. So focusing in on either one of our 2,4-D choline products, but making sure we get the right tank mix there for adequate weed control and preventing additional weeds from coming up. Last crop is this cotton piece, and very similar to the other two. We're starting clean. We know we're going to plant some the Enlist cotton trait with the appropriate varieties and maintaining that early soybean, early herbicide residual for preventing weeds from coming up. And lastly, that in-crop application of either the Enlist 2 or Enlist 1, followed with that residual herbicide. So when we think about best management practices, this is something that I probably deal with on a daily basis. And the start of everything is targeting the appropriate weed height. So we'll show a picture here shortly, but we really want to target 2 to 3 inch tall weeds. And when I say weeds, I'm specifically targeting water hemp species. That's our biggest threat here in Illinois. So after we've identified that we've got the right weed height that we're trying to target, then let's start thinking about tank mixes. So we're going to focus on that Enlist 1 herbicide plus glufosinate as our primary herbicide tank mixes, providing 2 modes of action to kill that water hemp. The second piece there is we know that we need to have the right adjuvants or spray additives in with this tank mix. So whether you're running AMS or crop oil and MSO, we need those right tank mixes there to be able to maintain that adequate herbicide effectiveness. And lastly comes the operation piece, not to overlook that. Gallons per acre makes a huge difference. Identifying that we running the right GPA of water, as well as the right nozzles and the right nozzle pressure coming out of those nozzles. We know that if we're doing a lot of things right, we will achieve the correct amount of weed control that we're looking for out there. So I mentioned, why spray that small weeds? And the picture here on the right shows a water hemp species. And looking at this 6-inch tall weed here, we can count over 15 different growing points on this plant. And if we were to show a 2-inch water hemp, 2 to 3 inch water hemp, we're going to probably be down in that 4 to 5 growing points. So identifying those smaller weeds is mainly a process of trying to hit that weed when there's less growing points out there, to be able to get that coverage that we need on them to ensure a good kill. Oh, I went one too far there. So just looking at the Enlist tank mix partners, again, this is something I mentioned. We're constantly evaluating. We know that on top of the different spray additives, the additional residual products that are out there, as well as fungicide and insecticides, we want to maintain that low volatility and that reduced drift that the Enlist system provides. So looking specifically at water hemp control, this is, again, something I probably deal with on a daily basis. As we look at the top left there, a glyphosate type of application is only showing 46% control, which is a pretty common here in Illinois, knowing that glyphosate resistance is a major dilemma. As we look at on the right side of that, looking at the Enlist 1 plus glufosinate, there we're jumping up to over 90% control. And when looking at the Enlist 1 herbicide plus glufosinate tank mix as compared to glufosinate alone, we're 9% better than that glufosinate tank mix alone. Now, when looking at a sequential application, and again, focusing on what's best in the industry, we know that a 2-pass with Enlist 1 plus glufosinate, followed by Enlist 1 plus glufosinate, is going to provide 99% control, which is the best in the industry. Switching gears a little bit, just to Palmer, similar weed, similar story. However, you see that with the glyphosate again, not the adequate control we wanted, and glufosinate alone does not provide the control that we want. However, going to that Enlist One plus glufosinate recommendation, followed by again that Enlist One plus glufosinate recommendation 15 days later, we're achieving the control that we want to that we desire, that every grower out there desires. So with that, Eric, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Do we have any questions? Oh, I think Eric, you're on mute.
There we go. Sorry, gang. Yeah, we got a few questions in here. And Jeff or Dennis, either one doesn't matter. There's a question here in regards to droplet size recommendation for an Enlist Liberty tank mix, i.e., what's the kind of that optimal range of droplet size you're looking for?
Yeah, so I can jump into this. So as far as looking at great resources, we know that there's a vast variety of nozzles first that are recommended, and going either to the Enlist Ahead app or the Enlist product use guide. We'll start there with the nozzle of choice, looking at that. So after you've identified the nozzle that you want, within our recommendations, there's actually a PSI range to be able to achieve that droplet size. So that to answer your question, I'd first identify what nozzles we want to be able to make sure that we have the right spray pressure and the right droplet size coming out of that nozzle.
So when you say, Dennis, a lot of times, or Jeff, either one, that we're looking for that course to a little bit, maybe ahead of a course. We're not looking for those big drops. We don't want those fine drops. We want that happy medium there, I think is what I'm kind of hearing, to give you the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I would agree. Coarse to medium, I think, is kind of what usually we look for. And with like Jeff said, when you follow those instructions or guidelines we have on the in the product use guide, you'll land there. So
yep, very good. We've got a couple questions here, and I'm going to weave these together. So we have a customer here says they were interested in having these slides, specifically on the kind of tank mix aspects there. And then also to where can folks go to maybe watch a previous webinar? Do y'all want to address some of the tools, Jeff or Dennis, on Enlist Ahead or the website?
I think if you just search, Enlist Ahead or Enlist, you can find your way to the Corteva website, and I believe the previous recordings are there, and all the slides. So I think there's there's multiple webinars out there on that give you more education pieces.
And if
and I would also say
maybe go get that tank mix approved tank mixes, they also need to go to the website. Would you say, Dennis, to see what?
Yeah.
Because we get new products always every week that are being updated. We try to keep that current. So that's where we can go to get those folks.
I was just going to say that website is very well organized. There's a plethora of resources on there. And those tank mix partners that's a very handy resource.
This is kind of it's a loaded question. It's an excellent question we get all the time. What's the best recommended adjuvant for a tank mix of glufosinate, Enlist One, and Everpre-X?
Yeah, so great question. We get this all day long. So at the end of the day, with those three products in that tank mix, we'll first start with AMS. There's lots of ways to get to the correct AMS load that's there, whether you're using a liquid or a dry. But having the free ammonium, we know that glufosinate loves that high load of AMS. So trying to target close to that 3 pounds is really ideal there. Now coming to adjuvants with that tank mix and Everpre-X specifically, we know that there's a high oil content in that Everpre-X. I will often talk about is just looking at Enlist One and Liberty. We're going to talk about utilizing the full rate of MSO to be able to target those weeds, to be able to get that herbicide into that weed and essentially get the kill that we need. With Everpre-X, we know there's a high oil content there. My recommendation there was specifically with that tank mix, back that MSO rate down to a half rate. We still need MSO. We still need that oil in that tank to assure herbicide effectiveness, but just back that oil content down to reduce the crop response.
Okay, very good. It's kind of along that same line here, Dennis or Jeff. What pressures are you recommending for the spray of applications out there?
I think when you look at that Enlist approved nozzle chart, you will see the pressure range, a lot of nozzles operate, say 20 to 70. If that's the nozzle range we like to see in that, probably that 50 to 70 range is where we like it. So the upper end of those ranges when you pick your nozzles.
All right, somebody was thinking this morning, might be a trick question. How big should soybeans be before the first post pass with Enlist Liberty? Let's see if you can answer
Um,
that.
Definitely a trick question. So again, we should be targeting the actual weed height there. So in a systems approach, going back to the recommendation, right? We're starting with a pre-herbicide, focusing on preventing weeds from coming up, and then a more detailed is a layered residual approach, knowing that between 35 days after that first application, we want to add another residual there. Now, when it specifically comes to the Enlist One and glufosinate, there we're targeting weed height, right? We do not want to target that 6-inch plus water hemp. That's on the top side of the range. We want to target that 2 to 3-inch water hemp, and thus that's the ultimate question. From the soybean side, we have the ability to spray Enlist One through R1 growth stage, so we got pretty good flexibility as far as timing of the soybeans.
Okay, very good, very good. We've got one question here. What is the best pH that you want for your water with Enlist tank mix? And I'll kind of maybe address that. The nice thing about the Enlist system is pH is not an effect on our weed control, which is that's very good. Now, obviously, folks, if you've got hard water, you want to make sure we're treating that water so that we can optimize our tank mix partners. But as that pH lowers, typically with glyphosate or glufosinate or adding AMS, it's not going to have a negative impact on our product. Okay. So typically, a lot of times you'll see that pH hover between 5 and 6. It's probably ideal 5 to 7, probably. If we're getting above that, we can start tying up some stuff, some of our products out there. All
Most
right.
of the time, like you said, Eric, most of the time your finished spray mixture is going to be around 5 to 6 when you get that 3 pounds of AMS in there.
Yep, yep. And as
Even
you
if
look, I know a lot of labels there, depending on the product. I know glufosinate kind of goes a little bit higher on the AMS and maybe some other products, but I think we typically all recommend AMS because not only for the hard water, but it just helps with weed control if we get into some challenging situations. So, folks, we had a lot of good questions here. We still got another Q&A session coming up here at the top of the hour. Dennis, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you and let you kind of work us through the next section.
you bet. So we're going to go through some application considerations and label requirements in this next section. So just a quick review here. We've kind of talked about nozzles and pressure range. So there is, those approved nozzles. We'll talk about that. Adjuvants, we've talked about the importance of AMS and MSO. Those are the two key adjuvants we want to talk about, and we'll explain why here in a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about sensitive areas and susceptible crops, spray versus no spray scenarios. We'll cover briefly the Endangered Species Act, which is getting to be more and more a topic we need to address when we're looking at labels, and then runoff mitigation understanding. So here's the Enlist application guide here. We've talked about some of the stuff, but the application window through R1 growth stage, so a lot of flexibility there with our soybeans, cotton before white bloom, and corn. We can go all the way up to 30-inch tall corn. If we want to use drop nozzles, and we can get up to 48-inch tall corn. Tank mix partners, go to enlisttankmix.com for those qualified tank mix partners. Again, that website's very well done and easy to navigate. You can also get your tank mix sequencing in there just to make sure you know how to add those products to the tank and which orders. Nozzles, again, there's a nice website that goes through nozzle choices. So enlist.com/nozzles to give you the right nozzle to run with our Enlist program. The other thing that's needs to be mentioned here, sprayer contamination. We have a lot of folks, that are running different chemistries in the same sprayer. So we need to make sure we're doing a good job of getting those sprayers cleaned out when we go, from maybe spraying corn to spraying beans and beans to something else. We need to make sure we're getting the sprayer cleaned out. Spray volumes, we talk about 10 to 15 gallons on the label. A lot of our applications of Enlist are going out at 20 gallons per acre. Not only do we recommend that, but I think a lot of folks have found that 20 gallons per acre just works better, especially when your tank mixed with glufosinate products. They need coverage. So that 20 gallon per acre rate is the best way to get that coverage. Spray rate, Enlist Duos, 4.75 pints. Enlist One, which is like Jeff said, that's the main product that we sell here in our area, 2 pints per acre. Spray pressures, again, when you look at those Enlist improved nozzle charts, you want to be on the upper end of that spray range. Usually that 50, 60, 70 PSI is where you want to be running when you're out spraying. And then the boom height, just keep that about 24 inches above the crop canopy. We're going to talk a little bit more in detail about this, but wind speed and weather is important. We want to make sure we're protecting susceptible crops as well. And then again, after spraying, make sure we're getting the sprayer cleaned out, put some solution in there, fill the sprayer about 10%, and let it sit. If you have time, that's a really good best management practice. So this is that nozzle chart. When you go to the Enlist qualified nozzle pages on the website, you're going to see these charts. There's a legend at the bottom that talks about what the different colors mean. Green provides the best balance of coverage with drift control. You can look through those and find the right nozzles based on your sprayer and based on maybe your preferences. But you'll have some choices in there that you can use depending on the sprayer you have. So this is an example getting into gallons per acre and nozzle choice. So the AIXRs by TJED is a nozzle that is a pretty common, pretty recommended nozzle when you're spraying Enlist, and 20 gallons per acre is the gallonage or the flow rate we want with Enlist. So when you look at these coverage papers here, you can see in the bottom left, 20 gallons per acre with the right nozzle gives you a 40.5% coverage. If you pull back to 10 gallons per acre and maybe you're using the wrong nozzle, you're at about a quarter of that coverage. So it really is important to get, the right nozzle and the right gallons per acre out there. This graphic here talks about deposition aids with Enlist herbicides. So these are zoomed in, under a microscope, and we're looking at spray deposition on a leaf surface. So in that upper left, you kind of see almost a perfect circle, and that is an example of just a spray droplet all by itself with no surfactant with it. And that's kind of similar to like when you wash and wax your car and leave it outside in a rainstorm, you see those little beads of water all over the hood. That's kind of what you get with a waxy leaf surface when you're spraying without any deposition aids. When you look at the upper right, that's non-ionic surfactant. Zoomed out a little bit more, you can see a little more spread there. The bottom two are crop oil and MSO. And what you see with crop oil is you get a little bit more spread. But MSO, the spread is a lot better. The deposition is a lot better, and you get a little bit more cratering or leaf penetration with MSO included in the tank mix. So now we're going to switch gears and talk about susceptible crops. So you cannot spray Enlist herbicides when adjacent susceptible crops are downwind. So that would be like non-Enlist cotton is a big one in the South. Anyone that's raising like garden type vegetables or products like watermelons, pumpkins, things like that, tomatoes, any sort of fruiting vegetable. So, my recommendation when I talk to folks about this, just make sure you kind of know your area, maybe who has a big garden, look around, acreages, make sure you're not gonna, create some problems spraying, when the wind is blowing towards those areas. You'll just have to pick a day when the wind is blowing the other way to spray those particular situations. And here's a graphic just showing you, If you have a field of Enlist beans, you cannot spray when the wind direction is blowing towards, some tomatoes or grapes. This is another, graphic here. We need to plant applications when wind is blowing away from susceptible crops. Cannot spray when it's going towards. And even if you have a field separation, we can't spray that. So we just have to be really careful with that. This is an example of Enlist compatible crops. So soybeans, even non-Enlist soybeans, are compatible with our Enlist system as far as if they're bordering your field. Corn, alfalfa, those type of products that are grown here in the Midwest are considered Enlist herbicide compatible crops. Now we need to talk about sensitive areas. So there's a requirement from the EPA to protect potential endangered species habitat areas. So, along, say, a wooded area, pastures, roadside ditch lawns, we got to be careful when we're spraying, when the wind direction is blowing towards those. And just, if it is blowing towards those, you can spray that field, but you do have to leave a 30-foot buffer and then come back and spray that area when the wind is not blowing towards that sensitive area. This is just some more practice examples here. So the wind is blowing north to south, 3 to 10 miles an hour. You can see where the Enlist is on there. So a buffer is not required when the wind is blowing away from the sensitive area. And you can spray towards those Roundup Ready to extend because those soybeans, even without the Enlist trait, are on the label as a crop that you can spray towards. So the wind's blowing the other direction here. A 30-foot buffer is required when the wind is blowing towards that sensitive area. Another note is if you are blowing, the wind is blowing parallel to, say, the tomatoes, it is still okay to spray, but it is a note just to kind of, be careful with that situation as well. So this is east to west. I think this one's kind of an easy one. Whoop, bumped ahead there. It is a do not spray situation when you're blowing towards a crop like tomatoes or garden or anything like that. So the Endangered Species Act has been around since 1973, but I think we're hearing more and more about the Endangered Species Act and some things that we got to do as professionals in agriculture to help I guess maintain these areas where endangered species, their habitats and things like that. So there's just getting to be much more of an effort here where the Endangered Species Act is involved. Another thing you'll see on labels as products get re-registered and as new products come with new labels, there's runoff mitigation measures on the labels. So this is, our Enlist label has this problem. First thing you want to do is understand what hydrologic soil group you're in. So A and B would be a little bit of a sandier soil. C and D would be more of a loamy type soil. So you just look through these mitigation measures here. The number of applications matter. So if you're just doing one application, you get 4 credits. A minimum till situation will get you 4 credits. Built buffer strips, cover crops, waterways, all those things get you points. You add those up. And, for A and B, you only need 4 credits. For C and D, which would be a lot of my trade area, you would need 6 credits. And, if you look at that list, it's not too hard to get up to 6 credits. Even with some pretty common practices that are out there right now. So Enlist Weed Control summary, Enlist Weed Control System is growing. We've talked about 65% market penetration in 2025. We have, you're going to hear more and more about PowerCore Enlist, PowerCore Ultra Enlist, and Vorseed Enlist corn gaining market share. Phytogen cotton is continuing growth in key markets. Enlist One is the big player here in our area and continues to deliver exceptional weed control and exceptional on-target neighbor-friendly weed control, which is really important. Growers are continuing to switch to the Enlist Weed Control System because of our superior genetics or that this technology is in, the application flexibility, and just overall good weed control. And just have confidence. We've had this trade out for a while now. It works. It works great. Broad spectrum weed control, great tank mix options with this, and spray flexibility. So more resources here. Enlist.com is a great place to start. You can find links there to all the different things like, nozzles, tank mix partners, things like that. Product use guides, application guides, things like that. That's all on this Enlist.com website. So now we're to the question and answer session here. Turn it over back to you, Eric.
Yep. So, folks, just remember, if you do have questions, we have plenty of time here to answer questions. Use the Q&A function. The first question here, Jeff or Dennis, is the grower's asking, what about using a fulvic acid to get Enlist glyphosate into the plants quicker? What's your thoughts on that? Or have you seen anything out there? There's a couple things I think, obviously, that growers have to recognize. First, fulvic acid would have to be a registered tank mix partner,
Yeah.
first and foremost. But after that, have you heard much about fulvic acid use out in the countryside?
I have not done any experimenting. I have not.
Dennis, any thoughts there?
No, I haven't heard of anyone using fulvic acid. I know there's been a lot of talk here the last year or two about different things, different additives, pH concerns, but we just haven't seen any sort of weed control efficacy concerns just using, MSO and AMS. And I think a lot of guys, do what works and haven't experimented with anything like fulvic acid.
Yeah, and my point or my question to this particular individual or folks who are thinking about this is obviously when you look at our rain fast period of a lot of our chemistry, typically anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, and that's a general term. Obviously, you got to look at the label, but as long as we're getting the same amount of product into the plant, whether you get it in there in 1 or 2 hours or 3 or 4, you're still getting the same amount. Now, ultimately, if we get in a rain-off event, that's where an ESA would come in to play, and that's why we have some of the label restrictions there. So it's something that it's kind of coming up. I'm hearing more questions about it. I just think as an industry, we haven't done a lot of work yet to really know. Question here is, what's your opinions utilizing a see and spray system where you layer the residual and spot spray weeds only? And does that change the ESA point scale? A lot of questions there.
A lot of questions.
A lot of questions out there too on see and spray.
Yeah, I'll touch base on the first one. So, and I think this particular question, the gentleman or individual that asked this is spot on. They're focusing on the residual piece as a primary piece, right? We want to prevent weeds from coming up. That's the easiest way for weed control. So that would be the first step in any type of successful see and spray type of application in my mind. And then the next piece comes to that technology with see and spray, identifying the timing. Again, that weed height, as I mentioned earlier, is the critical piece to that, knowing that we would need to target those weeds when they're that 2 to 3 inches tall for proper control.
Dennis, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I would say, just like Jeff said, that residual piece of it is very important. That's one of the key things with battling these small seeded, amaranthus species is just making sure that they don't emerge. I mean, that's the number one tactic to battle on them. As far as the see and spray and the ESA points, I haven't seen anything as far as mitigation measures there. I think for now we would have to just say that if you did one see and spray pass, even though you maybe only spray 30 or 40% of the field, I think you just have to count that as one pass. And it'll be interesting to see if the EPA does give a little bit more credit. It would make sense to me, but I just haven't seen it yet.
So under the current EPA guidance that we're aware of as an industry, you got a 100-acre field as an example, and you went out and you only had to spray 20 acres with, and I'm going to say see and spray technology. There's a lot of different manufacturers out there, but the technology in general. If you need to come back and spray again. If you're allowed 2 in-season applications, even though you sprayed 20 acres the first time, let's say you sprayed 30 acres the next time, you're done with that product for the entire field as it stands today. Now, the reason I bring that up is, and back to what Jeff and Dennis indicated, which I think very well indicated, we've actually need a premium pre-product out on those acres, because how many of you today would try to go out and grow soybeans with a pre-emerge product only and try to be weed free all the way through the end of the season? So if we're not out there layering a residual in season, you're going to put a lot of pressure on your pre-products. So if you have a two boom system where you can actually do a broadcast in season of a residual and spot spray, that's probably ideal. But for many of the retrofits out there, I know that's just not an option. So that's where I think some of the learning curve is really coming into play from everybody, not just Corteva, but everybody in general. So good question there. Um, Another one we had come in is, how long did you say the herbicide needs to be present on the weeds to be fully effective? Hours or days? And Gordon, actually, the answer to that is it depends on the technology. Typically, we see, and this is all done typically in a lab under growth chamber or greenhouse conditions, where we actually are using C14, looking at how much product gets in the plant, how much we wash off the leaf. And we can really, after a full day, you're going to get the most, more than likely, that you're ever going to get in for most of our translocated products. But there's not a big difference between 4 hours and 8 hours or 8 hours and 12 hours in a lot of products. You've kind of almost maximized that. But that's why it's so critical that we do get at least that amount of time. And that also does vary by weed species. We know some weeds take a little bit longer to get in versus others. So that's why you'll see maybe 1 hour for some FOP chemistry, 4 hours for other chemistry. And it's all about trying to make sure it gets in the plant. Good question. Folks, if you've got any other questions, we've got a little bit of time here. We're nearing the top of the hour. Jeff, Dennis, as we kind of think back here, I know a lot of growers, we're a couple months out from burn down. What are some things they need to be thinking about on their sprayers? And I know the economic times right now has got a lot of folks really pushing the pencil to the paper. Where do we cut out? What's some words of wisdom you'd give the audience today as we kind of think about what we're going into for 2026?
I can go first here. I think when it comes to weed control, there's a bigger risk there when you're trying to shave some dollars or save some money there, because if a problem arises from a weed control perspective, it can create a problem for the next 5 years. So I would definitely stay the course. I think soil applied products are really winning the battle against some of these weeds. We need to be bumping up rates like on products like Hybrid Pro, for example. That's our pre-merged product, our Keystone brands and corn. Make sure we're using higher rates on those to get started. I also like to tell guys, let's get started early. If we get some nice weather in March, I don't have any trouble with guys going out doing their burn down and and pre-merged products, getting them on early so that chemical is there when the soils start to warm up, weeds start to germinate. Those weed seedlings, imbibe that chemical and then they're done. So I guess that would be my words of wisdom to get 2026 started off on the right foot.
Yeah, and the only thing I like to add, I don't think there's any of us on this call that can predict Mother Nature. So knowing that again, we need to start clean, and we never know what hurdles Mother Nature is going to throw at us. I know oftentimes some of the biggest weed struggles that we have are issues where maybe we try to delay a burn down, or maybe try to incorporate two passes into one and create some efficiencies and try to save a few pennies here and there. And oftentimes when we hit a stretch of wet weather where we're not able to get in those applications, oftentimes by the time we get back in there, we have a bit of a disaster on our hands. So staying the course, again, as Dennis mentioned, I think is the critical process.
So we got several more questions coming in, gang. So is there residual to Enlist one? And if so, how long?
Yeah,
I would say in my experience, it'd be very little. I think it's you can maybe measure it a little bit, I suppose, in a lab, but I think from a practical standpoint, I wouldn't count on it, I guess would be my answer.
Yeah, and I agree 100% with Dennis there. From looking at our side, that's why we're going to talk about those preferred Enlist tank mix partners, thinking about those residual products there that really carry that heavy load. Looking at products like Inversa, especially targeting those small seeded broadleaves.
Well, and you mentioned that, so folks. There was a question here. Obviously, Enlist one of the key reasons why is that flexibility. If you go to Enlist head or enlist.com, go to that Enlist One Tank Mix Partners. I think we have over 1,700 Tank Mix Partners out there, and it's probably grown since last time. We're pretty very flexible there. Kind of a trick question. How much PSI should I use to push Enlist down in big wind? It's a good question. Good question. What's your thought, gang?
Well, I guess my opinion is, um, first of all, what's big wind? I mean, we got to stay on the label. I think the label requirement's up to 15 mile an hour. So that's where I'm going to stay. And even if you're, pushing 15 mile an hour, I still would like to see you at that higher end of your range. I think with the way Enlist is formulated, um, we've tested it. That's what we recommend. And it really does stay put. It's been out in the market a long time. I'm sure Enlist has been sprayed in some wind, and we just don't see a lot of off-target movement. I'm certainly not advocating for going out and spraying in big wind, but I still like to see. I think that pressure is important to get coverage mainly is why I would say that.
One thing here, I think Dennis and Jeff, which for a lot of us, we remember back in the days where you had to kind of try to drive 8 mile an hour and you had to change a pressure gauge here on the tractor. And those days are kind of over because of all the auto adjust. Ultimately, what we're trying to do, folks, is we're trying to hit a certain GPA. These are spray rigs. They're not NASCAR. So we can't go across the field at 30 mile an hour, even though they may try, but we got to try to match that up to give us that optimal droplet spectrum, which is whatever that PSI is. And that's how you achieve good weed control. Good question here, gang. With a tank mix of Sonic and 2,4-D, thinking about that burn down market. What is recommended for an adjuvant in that system? What are some things that maybe your growers are doing out there today?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, oftentimes as well, we're going to just sort of follow the guidelines with what we need for Enlist there. So, thinking about GPA, thinking about adjuvants, whether AMS. Oftentimes in my area, we'll also throw a glyphosate in there. And with that 2,4-D to be able to provide some additional adjuvant that's there. So the combination of adding some AMS, adding if there's glyphosate there, that NIS of a loaded glyphosate, as well as the Sonic would be ideal tank mix.
I know a lot of times, depending on it's all weather dependent, but if we start getting into cool conditions, Jeff and Dist, I think a lot of guys may be throwing some crop oil in there, trying to, depending on what you're going after from a post emerge perspective versus residual.
Yep.
Question here comes from Ronald. How long does it take for weeds to start to try and shut down after I'm assuming it's Enlist been sprayed?
Yeah.
Want to take
So
a
I mean,
stab at that?
yeah, so I think initially, visually, right, you're going to start to see again that enlist needs to metabolize into that plant. We talked about how that soybean plant needs to metabolize it. The weeds need to do the same thing. So it's not going to be that instant type of control that you would see out of some of the burners, I would say. So it's going to take a little bit, but as far as activity visually, you will start to see visual activity within 48 hours.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
this was kind of a follow-up in a tank mix with Liberty Ultra, one where we've got a translocated product versus a contact or more of a contact product. You'll see some varied symptomology depending on which one you're looking at. So, do we need to add surfactant, gang? What's your thoughts on that?
Um, yeah, I mean when you're running like say an Enlist Liberty tank mix, we definitely recommend AMS and MSO in that mix. And I would say in the plots that I spray it, to me, when you see that that curling and twisting effect, it happens pretty quick. I mean, you can see that pretty quick after an application of Enlist, at least quicker than what you might think. So, um, you know that that product is working, especially if it's a nice sunny day. Um, it seems to work pretty quick. So,
Yeah, and I think Dennis and Jeff, I don't want to call it the Roundup Ready generation, but we created a whole generation where if we had any kind of burn, it was the whole world's falling, the sky's falling. And I don't think folks remember the days of Cobra where we dropped every leaf off that bean and raised 60 bushel beans. The reason we're adding in that MSO is to really, it's kind of a safeguard in my mind. If we start to get the drought conditions, weeds maybe not be as actively growing. If you've got, a 1 to 2 inch weed, man, we can really get it really well. But when you right beside it's a 4 or 5, maybe even at 6 inch, it's starting to kind of harden off. Adding in that MSO or that COC really puts it over the edge and gets it in the plant quicker. And the next question here, which would be when spraying Enlist and Liberty, what's the preferred MSO or COC?
Yeah, so I obviously we go back to tank mix partners. That's the number one value spot there. So and we know from like specifically in MSO, there's different high load products. There's your baseline products. So that rate really depends around the formulation. And so the net first answer, go to the tank mix and identify that that MSO that you have is approved. And at the end of the day, the second piece is with what you're doing, whether it's crop oil or MSOs preferred, you're being intentional about trying to kill that weed, right? We're doing the right things. You're out there acting the way we should, and Eric mentioned earlier what we had those days of glyphosate when that used to kill everything. That was the easy button. We also didn't have water hemp as to the severity that we do today. So a lot more challenges today than what there was 10 years ago.
yeah, I would I would just add there's a lot of different MSO containing products or crop oil containing products out there. Just make sure you read the label and get the right rate because sometimes there's some that have different concentrations and things, and you just want to make sure you read the individual label of the specific product you're using and make sure you're getting the right rate in there because we have had some confusion on that in the past and wind up with maybe a lower rate unintentionally and then maybe a little bit non-acceptable weed control and I've been amazed at how well the right rate of, say, MSO, for example, really does make the system work very well.
There's a question here, and I think it's more maybe confusion, and I'll help spell it out here. When running Enlist Liberty at 20, you're technically off label. Any talk of changing 10 to 15 on Enlist label. Keep in mind our list label, Corey, in this case, that's the bare minimum we want to see is at 10 to 15. A lot of times you'll see a lot of our research is done at 15 because we might be running a glufosinate and a glyphosate. We know at 10 GPA glyphosate works fine, but really, if we're going to run an Enlist and a glufosinate combo, we really want to be at that 20. 15 bare minimum, but I prefer the 20. It just makes a lot of the problems go away if we're using that 20 GPA. We've got several other here. If we make it 2 passes with the contact and systemic, and they're separate, which should I spray first?
I would personally challenge back to, again, thinking about having 2 modes of action in every tank. So we know that resistance management is a huge piece of what we're doing. The tools in the toolbox today are probably going to be very similar to what we have in 5 years. So resistant management is a big thing, and for specifically the water hemp species that we deal with, that weeds highly evolves quickly. So I would challenge really hard to be able to constantly think about always having 2 modes of action, and to me the most effective 2 modes of action are the 2,4-D choline and the glufosinate always together.
One of the challenges, and I would say this in general, and you think about it from an agronomic perspective, if we go out and we burn a lot of leaves and we get maybe say 95% control, 90% control, we've now really irritated the heck out of that weed. We have really messed up that foliage. So if we try to go back with a translocated product, you're going to limit uptake on that plant. So think about it. If I went out with paraquat and got a half kill, it's going to be a lot harder to kill everything out there with a translocated product later. So that's why having both those together make a lot of sense. Um, what's a recommended rate of Liberty and Liberty Ultra to go in with Enlist One or in general?
I would say a lot of folks are, reading the label and using the higher end of the rate range. I don't have those rate ranges memorized, and there's a lot of different Liberty products out there that are being used with Enlist, but I can't say for sure what the exact rate is, but I do know that a lot of guys have bumped that rate up towards the higher end, just to get a little better weed control with that higher AI load out there.
Jeff, I think my memory is right. And again, great answer to this. We always read the label to find out it, to make sure you are using the 1X rate. But I think for most of your glufosinate products, that's really around a 32 ounces, kind of that minimum,
Yeah,
just straight product. If you're into the ultra, at minimum, it's 24. And I know that BSF has maybe increased that up slightly with some things they're working on there. Again, it's always easier to be aggressive on the front end and have to come back and bring something very subtle versus, I say bring a sledgehammer, follow with a ball peen. It has never worked the other way around. When you've aggravated and didn't get a very good weed control, we have to throw the kitchen sink at it the second pass. And by that time, the weeds are big, they're hardened off, weather conditions, all the things that we fight. It's always better to give full rates up front on the front end. We've talked about the final solution, pH. Do you prefer with Enlist? There's no detriment. Enlist is not negatively affected per se by pH, and there's been a fair amount of work done on that. Typically speaking, I'd say 5 to 7 is the ideal range. But if you're starting to do tank mixes with other products, always make sure you're adding that AMS to get so that we don't negatively impact those iron or calcium, manganese would have a negative impact, say, on glyphosate. Good question here. Another one is the situation where I don't get 100% weed control the first pass, and I need to come back and do a second app. How quick should I wait to retreat that area?
Yeah, so going back to that study, depending on that I showed there towards the end of my session there, we looked at a sequential application for 15 days later, and I think that timing is pretty accurate to be able to have that fairly soon. As soon as that weed begins to regrow, that's when we got to go out there and re-hit that. So typically that 2 week time frame there is pretty ideal for that additional application.
Yeah. I think a lot of folks say 10 to 14 days is kind of that ideal window, depending on what Mother Nature is going to throw at you and everything else. Sometimes it's, we got to work around things. But folks, we've reached the top of the hour. We're a little bit over. We're through all the questions. On behalf of all the speakers here today, thank you for your time. We know you, and we value your time with us, and hopefully we've answered all your questions. Have a safe spring and good luck out there.